Again, hi, everybody. Welcome. So happy to know that you're with us. I'm Julie Moose. I'm the Executive Director of the National Press Club Journalism Institute. And we're very happy to be hosting this program on Newsrooms after the summer of protest. Has anything really changed? Thank you to National Press Club members Maria Rodriguez and Peter Copeland for planning this program in partnership with us and with the Communicators Committee. It's going to be a very interesting and informative conversation, first among our wonderful panelists, and then we hope you'll join in by sharing your questions using the Q&A queue. So I'm going to turn this over to our moderator in a moment, Michael McCarter, who is USA Today Managing Editor of Standards, Ethics, and Inclusion. But first, I want to say again, welcome and thank you to our panel. Amanda Barrett, Deputy Managing Editor at the Associated Press, Rene Sanchez, Editor and Senior Vice President at the Minneapolis Star Tribune, and Dorothy Tucker, Investigative Reporter for WBBM in my hometown of Chicago, and President of the National Association of Black Journalists. So again, thank you all for being here. And Michael, over to you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you again to our panelists. Thank you for everybody who has joined us today. I hope you get a lot out of this conversation. This is important, and we have a great group of panelists that will dig right in. So I want to kick us off with a kind of an overarching question here. Newsrooms have been announcing a lot of great changes over the last few months. Their new diversity leadership positions, their new task forces. They're creating new projects, but after years of inequities in our American newsrooms, some have even characterized it as systemic racism in American newsrooms. Has anything really changed? Amanda, I'd like to start with you.
Sure, thank you, Michael, and thank you to everyone for having us here today for this very important conversation. I would say that things are starting to change. Because there was so much conversation and so much conversation inside our newsrooms, particularly as we were all covering the summer of protests. And it started us on the path of soul searching, but we are nowhere near done. I think we have started and we're thinking and we're starting to make change. But my concern is, how do we make the change permanent? How do we really try to not only reach different communities, but also give more people power in newsrooms and hear their voices and bring them into the decision-making about what we do? So that's where my mind is.
Okay. Rene, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with Amanda. The only thing that I would add is that we're taking a first set of steps that we think can be meaningful, but there's a huge, enormous, there's a real burden of proof on to the point of how do we sustain it well, and how a year out from now can we credibly say there has been change. I guess I would say, Michael, the only really evident change so far is, I think in our newsroom, given the magnitude of what happened here in Minneapolis, is that we are daring to listen much harder, and to even when we think we're listening, to listen harder to the journalists of color, to some of the nuances of the issues beyond kind of the obvious shortcomings. And so that has been, I think, an important part of the process so far, and I hope it may well fuel us to significant change.
Excellent. Dorothy, you have thoughts on this one?
Yes. I think the protest fueled a racial reckoning in newsrooms across this country. Just like we saw it in other industries, I think that we definitely see it in the newsrooms. What I see is our Black journalists who are coming together, who are joining together in demanding change within their newsrooms. They're demanding equality. They're demanding better assignments. They're demanding that their pitches, that managers listen to them. And because of that, I see that there are more hires. we were talking about this the other day at NABJ. We put out a lot of congratulations to this person, to this person. We are seeing some movement. I think managers are hearing, to Renee's point, they're hearing the voices of Black journalists and other people of color in particular, and responding. And if they aren't hearing it, they are seeing things around the country and they are being proactive. So I think there is some movement. The question to, like Amanda said, is how do we sustain this? And I think one of the ways that we sustain this is to say to our Black journalists in particular, and to the others as well, don't stop screaming. Just keep pushing. Don't sit back and say, okay, we have one new manager in, we're good. No, we have to keep up the fight. We have to keep the heat up. So that's one way. There are a number of other ways that I can talk about later, some things that I think we should do to address the systemic racism, but I'll stop there for now.
Okay, I appreciate that. Well, when you talk about sustainability and keeping it going, why should journalists of color in the industry now believe that anything will change going forward, especially if you give our history and we go back to historical data? And I'll just use, all of our organizations have challenges, but I'll just use the AS&E as an example right now. Back in 1978, they vowed to achieve parity in newsrooms with demographics of the United States by the year 2000. It is 2020. And in 2020, we're saying, the organization is saying, they will reach parity by 2025. We seem to be kicking the can down the road. What will make this stick? What will make this sustainable? What will make the change be permanent? I'll start with you again, Dorothy. Yeah.
I think one of the things that will make the change, and I don't know that I can say permanent, but I think one of the things that will make the fight more constant is that we're frustrated now. I think because of the protests, because of what is happening, because of the unrest in this country, because of the racism, we're frustrated and we are perhaps more determined, and that there are more of us who are in the newsroom and who are more aware. If you look at in 1978, and that was just about the time that I came in, I was the only one in the newsroom. There were no others. Fast forward to today, when I'm definitely not the only one in the newsroom, so there are more of us. And again, what I'm seeing is that literally, I have chapters reaching out to me every day saying that we are getting together and we are going to our managers and we are demanding to see more people of color in management positions. We're demanding to see more people of color in decision-making positions. And I think that's why you're going to see a change this time. And it's because of the numbers, it's because of the time, and it's because of the frustration. And young people in particular, they are not as patient as we were. They're not willing to sit back and say, if I do the right thing, if I sit here long enough, my time will come. They're speaking up. And I like that. I like that they're saying, wait a minute, I've done all of these things. I want my turn now. I want my opportunity now. So you've got, it's a different time. And I am prayerful that it will make a difference and it will sustain.
Rene, what's it look like in your shop?
Well, I think let's be honest. I think there should be skepticism. If you look over recent years or even the decades, gains are very incomplete. They're fragile. I don't think there's a magic bullet, and we're not approaching it that way as we renew this work with, I would say, greater urgency than ever. I mean, the way we're thinking about it is, is that we have to rethink and have a lot more intention around everything from the pipeline of young journalists to developing more mid-career journalists of color into positions of leadership, and just the full spectrum blitz, you might say, in the hope that in all those ways there will be gains. The one other thing I would say that is different compared to any point that I've seen so far is that here in our newsroom, we are working directly and constantly with several leaders of the journalists of color in our newsroom. And what's been great about it is that it's starting as very much a shared partnership. For example, after 2 months of listening and really trying to get more deeply at the issues before we put out an action plan, I let the leaders of that group line by line it and call out what was maybe tone deaf subtly to something, to sort of put for emphasis on other things. And so we're really trying to do this together, not just as a leadership group responding to particular new questions or demands.
I think there's a couple of things at play here. First, I think for AP, this went from being a newsroom conversation to a company conversation. A lot more people started talking about their experiences or feeling like they got left out of opportunities or they weren't heard. And so I think there was a groundswell of sharing that really helped us when we started thinking about how can we change the way we operate in news, and how can we think about the audience that we want to reach, bringing different perspectives and voices to the fore, and actually telling some unusual stories. And we heard back from customers that that's what they want. There's a business imperative here that we should not ignore. For us, our customers tell us that we need to be giving a fuller picture of the communities that we cover. We need to get a diversity of voices and opinions and different people in our coverage. And so, having that kind of response helped us, think about more holistically how we can change our operation to do better. But there is still skepticism. There's definitely skepticism. And I think we have to show our work, and we have to be really serious about making change and show commitment as leaders of our news organizations in order for people to see that a change is happening.
I just want to add, I think
Michael, I think
if
we don't do that, you're not going to see the support of the community. I mean, Edelman did a survey and found that people want to know that the brand they support is conscious, is socially conscious. They want to know that the products that they buy, that the manufacturers who make them have a diverse company. And so the community looks at the news industry the same way. And it's important, so to Amanda's point, it is about the bottom line. And, I know that we may not be able to see these changes happen today or tomorrow, but I think it's different this time. You have companies like the Star Tribune in the AP putting together an action plan. 50 years ago, individual companies were not putting together an action plan. There was a mandate, from the Kerner Commission, and there was a mandate from the ASNE to do the right thing and to make some changes. But now, individually, these companies are putting together a plan to make a difference. What we have to do is to make sure that they carry out those plans.
Well, Dorothy, I want to stick with this topic for just a few more minutes, because you mentioned something that I've heard numerous times. You said when you first came in, you were the one. I believe that there are still numerous newsrooms out there where there is still the one. And if you are the one, you don't have a collective to go to management and say, I want this change, or we need this change. We have journalists of color leaving the business. How do we model newsrooms of all sizes to keep journalists of color in the business, to train them, to provide them mentorship, and to help promote them or give them career plans that will help them achieve their goals? And I don't mean just from cub reporter to seasoned reporter, but to editor, to executive editor, to general manager, and dare I say, into the boardroom. What do we need to do to get to that?
Well, I mean, two things. One, I think kind of two different questions here. There are many newsrooms that there is still only one. You remember the case in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where the editor quit because of an inflammatory headline that he did not like. He was the only Black editor. He was the only Black person in the newsroom. And now he quit over that. And there are many cases where there are one. But I think, again, the difference today is when I started, there is one in a newsroom, but we are much more connected, because of NABJ, NAHJ, AAJA, and all the other organizations. There is an opportunity for, even if you are the only one, to network with others and others who will support you. My job as president of the NABJ is to be the backup, is to be the support, is to be the voice when you need it. To your other question about what do we do, I can tell you that there are a number of programs that companies already run, and I'm sure they're at all of your shops, that are mentorship kind of programs, that are apprenticeship programs, that are fellowship, that are scholarship programs that help people get in the business. That give them an opportunity to get an internship, an apprenticeship, and to get that first job, and then to perhaps move up. The problem is that there's a gap. They get in, and then too many times, there is nothing to do to continue that mentorship, to continue that relationship, to continue to give them opportunities. So after 4 or 5 years, 6 years, they leave because they don't have a role model, because nobody's giving them the opportunities. What is more hiring at the top, because the road up is too long. It's going to be 10, 12, 15 years before you get there. And for the company here to the top. No, the manager's at the top. Bring them in. Dare say they get to the boardroom, hire them right at the boardroom. People of color have that kind of experience. They've been in the industry long enough. They can come in as executive editors. They can come in as journalists. So just start there. We shouldn't always have to start on bottom. We should be able to start at the top as well.
Got you. Rene, looked like you had something.
I think that's a great point of emphasis. What we're thinking about, what we're striving to do with more intensity to do it better is frankly to increase accountability. And what I mean by that is to increase accountability on this issue in every single department of the newsroom, to simply not just say, okay, this is a newsroom thing, it's a features thing, it's a photo thing, it's a Metro News thing, it's a copy desk thing. And so what we're trying to do is get a plan going, and it is in motion now, in which the new leadership position we have on these issues is to kind of lock in a quarterly meeting with the leaders of each department and be able to ask questions like, where are you now as compared to you were last quarter with the development plan of journalist X? You know, where are you now with recruiting on that job, you know, that is coming up this summer? Things like that. And what we're hoping is that if we can increase accountability in each department in a structural way, that over the next year, a lot more will bloom. And then that critical mass, well, I think my hope anyway, would present to journalists of color coming in at all different stages of their career. You know, they see the commitment, they see themselves, they see peers like them. And then that's how it gets sustaining. But that's the challenge before us, and it's pretty stark.
Amanda, did you have any thoughts on this particular question?
Yeah, I think it's something we all struggle with because let's face it, journalism was not always great at helping people create career paths just from the get-go. That's just like a basic issue that we have. But we really have to focus in and think about how we can create assignments for people, give them stretch assignments, give them opportunities, create new leadership opportunities. You know, for us, I know we can be very hierarchical and we have committees, but there's always the same people on the committees. Can we pull some other people in? Can we give them a chance to lead, give them a chance to try something new? Because we know that we need them to build those skills, because we need them to be leaders in the newsroom in the not so distant future. So I think all of us, it's incumbent upon us as news organizations to really help our Black staffers, all of our staffers, but particularly our minority staffers, find a way forward, develop the skills that they need so that they can be in those positions. And, you know, Dorothy's point is so key about recruiting at all levels. I am really fed up with the idea that the only way that we can bring in minority journalists is to bring them in on the entry level. There are plenty of people like me who've been in the business 30 years. They've been doing the work for a very long time. Why are they not getting the call? Why are they not being considered? That's just something we really have to focus in on, because, you know, typically what happens is people hire their friends. We have to break through that. And as Rene said, we have to hold people accountable. You know, we have to say, no, you're not going to go hire your friend. We need to look at the panel of people that are being interviewed for jobs and be more demanding that people are out there recruiting all different kinds of people so that we can bring those voices into our companies.
You know, yeah, I think
recruiting efforts, and I just want to say this because Amanda said exactly what I wanted to say. The recruiting effort is key, you know, or one of the keys for sure. You have to make sure that you are searching beyond your small circle. And that means reaching out to organizations like the NABJ. We have 4,100 members. You know, we have databases of editors. We have databases of producers. We have databases that we're developing now of freelancers. You know, we have the talent there, but we are beginning to get calls, you know, now more than ever. And it's because I had pretty much been, you know, jumping up like the donkey. You know, I was, it's my turn, take me. You know, I've been saying about NABJ, you know, come to us, you know, we have the talent. So that, because I want this industry to know that we are a resource. And it's the same thing for NAHJ, it's the same thing for AAJ, it's the same thing for the Native Americans. And, you know, so I think these companies have to be very mindful, you know, and very, when they go to say we are going to fill this position, you know, don't just make a phone call, you know, go to the universities as well. Don't just call your friends, because some kind of way you almost need to ask yourself the question, and the company needs to say, why is it that we keep hiring people who look like the managers we already have? Why do we keep hiring white people who look like white people?
Well, that's
how
the
do we-
question. That's the question. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but that's the question I was just about to ask. I have been asked in other newsrooms, how do we trust the process if the same leadership is in place that either got us to this position or has maintained this position? And Amanda, to your point of they're hiring their friends, I also want to make sure that there's systems in place. And I'd like to know what you all have in place at your shops. I'd like to know there's systems in place so it's more than the Rooney Rule. And anybody that's not familiar with the Rooney Rule in the NFL, it requires that you bring in a candidate of color, a minority person, to interview for any head coaching job. But as I've seen it, and I've seen this happen in newsrooms, the candidates are brought in to check off a box. And the conversation is had, they walk in the front door, the conversation is had as they're walking, and the next thing you know, they're at the back door and they're out. And we did our job. What are your shops doing to ensure that the managers have the right training, they have the right understanding, they have the right vision to understand the need to diversify the newsrooms? Rene, it looked like you were ready to
Yeah,
say.
I think that's a great reference. I mean, I have literally invoked the Rooney Rule here to our leaders, because on the one hand, it sounds great, but let's assess it. Like, where are we X years later when you look at the landscape of professional football and head coaching? And I think it could easily be argued that hasn't been that effective, because, to your point, it's a kind of box checking exercise. And so we have invoked that directly as a clear sign of how this can go way off track or start as strong rhetoric but have no consequence. And so what we're trying to do, we've actually, to be honest, I mean, obviously we're just kind of renewing our intensity around getting much better, but we're already discovering challenges within the challenges, and some of them have sort of relate to that, in the sense is that as we've talked to sort of a broad spectrum of leaders, we realize, wait a second, this is too quiet. The same people are asking questions, and a lot of people aren't. So we've subsequently tried to break that down in small meetings of 3 or 4 people with leaders in the room of color, so that there can be a direct and intense reckoning about what is not right. And secondly, on the one hand, we've appointed a new senior leader to help lead the way on these issues, but we've already had to kind of ring a bell and say, wait a second, the person in this job cannot suddenly have 510 tasks that everyone else gives them. And they just say, well, we got this person and they're going to help me with, and so we're trying to create a culture of full ownership, not box checking, because I think that is the key risk. And we'll look up in a year and we'll have these sort of feel good box checks, but no consequential change.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think, what we've been doing training, but I'll be honest with you, there have been times when someone has put forth a candidate and we said, no, you can't hire that person. That's been a bit of a reckoning that makes things tense. But we have to be firm if we want to bring in more diversity into the company. And I think there's definitely power in that. There's also power in just talking to people about, what are you looking for? What are the exact qualifications? Because one of the things that we found was that, there'd be a supposed list of qualifications, and then someone would come along who was a friend of someone who does something totally different, like speak French. And that's what we say is what we're basing the hire on. Well, that wasn't in the qualifications for the job. So I think it is about talking to folks honestly, holding people accountable, and really reviewing what they're doing. It's not enough to just go out and hire, but we need to be stopping and assessing what our progress is, seeing what the problems are, and seeing what we can fix. And it's hard. It's not an easy job because, of course, we're all like really busy. There's a lot of news every single day. It's very crazy. but this is a high priority for us. And it's something, frankly, that we have to do for our own survival.
I think a couple of things. I think one of the things that we should consider, and I know newsrooms are already doing this, but I would like to see more do it, is for, especially for those middle managers, no matter what race they are, to have an unconscious bias training. You know, I think some of it is that they, you know, managers, they don't even realize what they're doing. Nobody's doing this maliciously, you know, but I think that would help, you know, so that there is kind of an education, kind of a retraining. I think something that will help the overall effort is the data. You know, I mean, as journalists, we ask for the data all the time. And newsrooms, media companies, they don't want to release what their numbers are. You know, how many people of color do you really have on the editorial staff? Why do we want that? So that when you talk about sustainability, we want to be able to say, when we meet with you 6 months from now, you haven't moved the needle. And in order for us to know how far you've come, we need to know where you are. You know, so that just in case over that 6-month period, you know, what we see happening is that companies will put out a press release to say, we hired this person, we hired that person, but the numbers haven't changed because they lost 3 others because those 3 got fed up and left. So the numbers haven't changed. And where are these people that you're hiring? You know, what positions are they in? So that is something that, you know, beginning to push for. We want the data, you know, so that we can see today and we can come back and look tomorrow, what have you really done? And where have you really made those changes that are going to make a difference?
Well, I think you hit on a very good point there. The transparency is vital to holding people accountable and making sure that things do change. I'm happy to say that the company I work for, Gannett, just recently went through an audit themselves. They publicly vowed to reach parity by 2025, just like the News Leaders Association did. And I think it's important that companies do that. But how do you continue to communicate internally and externally about our efforts while at the same time getting your audience engaged in the process? In order for us to have the inclusion of different communities, we have to get into those communities. And I think we've seen several times, whether it was in St. Louis or whether it happens to be in Renee's town, we often are not trusted when something goes down in specific communities. And it's because we only show up when something goes sideways. So how are we communicating internally and externally and with our audience, how we're trying to move forward and why it's important that we do that?
You know, I'll just offer a couple of quick examples from here that are sort of forming atop our list, that are becoming fresh vows. One thing we're going to do next year, to that point exactly, is form a kind of community panel in which we would have recurring meetings about our coverage and be transparent about where our weaknesses and blind spots could be, listen to the perception of those. I have a monthly newsletter that's sent out to all subscribers, and I've already chronicled some of this to them. We're going to do that in a regular way. And you know, the challenge is, I think, to what Amanda said too, this is not just an internal challenge, it's an external challenge in terms of coverage. And I think, you know, we have a burden of proof to make sure that our coverage does a much better job, and that it's not just sort of a crisis coverage, that we are full spectrum in what we write about communities of color. And so what we're going to do is we're shifting some resources around, and we're kind of doubling down on our coverage of race. And right now we have one reporter devoted to it full time. Obviously, lots of people tackle the subject in various beats, but we're gonna shift things so that we have 2, and in the hope that we can just do a better job of having more complete coverage, not just crisis coverage, and so that's all we're working on this fall, with the hope that next year we can really start to show some gains.
I would say for us, internally, we have been having a lot of soul searching conversations, and it actually naturally flowed out of the coronavirus crisis. When everyone went home, our HR department started, gathering people to talk about their feelings because people were stressed, trying to be parents and homeschool and all those things. And then when the protests began, we sort of naturally flowed into that. And they actually brought in Dr. Ron Brown, who led some sessions for us around unconscious bias and white privilege, things of that nature. And we were having those conversations. And then the news department, actually, all of US News went through fault lines training with the Maynard Institute so we can start identifying our biases and start looking at our coverage in a different way. And I've been leading an effort to create what we are calling inclusion champions. At the AP, whenever we have something that we really need to drive down into the organization, we create champions who represent each vertical or format, region, or team. And those people are really tasked with having conversations on the front end of our stories about making sure that we are challenging our own assumptions about communities, trying to think about how we can bring different voices into our coverage, different perspectives, some different sources. Because if we look at some of our coverage, we see a lot of white men who are the voices. And we really need to get broader than that. So we've got folks who are really trying to drive this down into the organization, because I feel very strongly that if it lives at the senior manager level, we're not doing our jobs. It really needs to be driven by our staff, and they're enthusiastic because a lot of them have had these frustrations for a very long time. Wherever they come from, they felt that we are not doing a good job in this area. So I think we're off to a good start there. But we know that we're in a different kind of business because, of course, we are selling content to customers, and we can help our customers because we can provide for them some of the different voices and perspectives that they may not be able to have because they may have a small staff. And we can tell different kinds of stories.
Here's what I'll add to that. I think what newsrooms need to do is make the reporters more educated about all the communities. As in Chicago, when I was doing general news, I could tell you about the nuances of every community in the city. I had contacts in every community. I was frustrated when, and so many Black reporters are, when you get that phone call that says, hey, do you know, I'm covering this story in this community. What Black person should I call? Who are the community people? What community person should I call? Where should I go if I want to get the Black, man on the street interviews for this? Where do I go? Where did I never had to ask those questions when I went to the white communities. Why? Because anytime I went, I collected that information. I had my I had a Rolodex on every community. And I made sure that I understood the history of every community. And I think that's something that my colleagues didn't do because I was the fallback. They could call the Black reporter, and the Black reporter would be able to answer those questions. And that's just not fair. So I want to see news managers make everybody educated on every community, so that any story that comes up, you're not going to make a mistake. You're going to have enough knowledge about that community, or perhaps understand there's somebody in the community you can call so that you don't end up using a word, using a phrase, leaving something out and offending anybody. So
I would,
you know,
I want to
that's
second
what I
that.
thought.
I want to second that as that's basic beat building. You know, if you're really working your beat, you should have a wide variety of contacts across communities, because otherwise, how are we sure that you're telling the full story? So, you know, it's really frustrating as a Black journalist when you get called in to be the voice or be the one to find the sources. But, you know, as a Black journalist, you've always had to go out and learn about other communities. And every journalist should be expected to do that.
So I will
I mean, it's
I
just-
will add on to that as well, because as a visual journalist at the beginning of my career, we don't have a choice. We go everywhere. We see everything. We talk to everybody. I have covered Klan rallies because that's just what I had to do. I think that it is imperative. You said beat building. I think it's imperative that we encourage people. I understand we're under COVID right now, so this may not apply in the current state that we're in, but I encourage everybody to go visit other communities, go talk to people physically, not just pick up the phone, because you don't get the same sense of smell, taste, sound that you do when you hit it in person. And I think it's vitally important that then you understand some of the nuances of every community. And I'll throw one more thing in there, which goes to your point about, you know, and I think there's a fear factor for some reporters, either that they are just nervous about being in certain areas. But I will remember when I first got to Cincinnati, and I was asking somebody how to get to the University of Cincinnati from our newspaper. And they said, well, get on this highway, go this way, get off on this exit. It's, you know, it's about 3 miles this way, da, 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 da. What I found later is that the direct route to the university was straight up our street that the newspaper's on, and you end up right at the university. The problem was you had to go through a poor Black community to get there. And the reporter that I was talking to refuses, or I don't know if they still do, but at the time refused to go that way because it went through a Black community. So we have to make sure that we're understanding our staff as well, and what's motivating them and how to encourage them to get over those fears. Because again, I will tell you, visual journalists don't really get a choice. They have to go. So I know we're getting close on time. I do want to ask a few more questions. How are you currently getting your community to understand the need for diverse voices and diverse faces and diverse people, topics in your particular markets? Again, I'll throw out an example from 2 places I've been in my time. And as editor, I would get phone calls. And if there were positive stories about minorities on the front page, they would call me and say, we don't need to see those people on our front page. It's just print newspaper. And I'd say, well, what do you mean? And they say, you know, these people. And the funny thing to me, and it's not funny, I just say it that way, is that if there was ever a person of color that was being arrested, indicted, you know, anything negative, I never got a phone call. So how do you get our audience to understand that these diverse communities have positive images? They're not, some of the negative stereotypes that have been published over time are not what these communities are entirely made of. Just like no community is entirely made of any one thing. How are you getting not only your staff, because we realize that's a challenge, but how are you getting your audience who has been forever seeing the same thing? I think, Amanda, you pointed out that, you know, coverage is primarily X, Y, and Z. How do you get your community to understand and embrace the change that needs to happen? Amanda, I'll start with you.
Okay, well, I think you have to accept that not everyone's going to embrace it. I'm going to tell you, you know, in my role as head of news coordination, my inbox is ablaze and it is not always pretty. But I think that, you just accept it internally that you need to tell those stories. And then you will start to hear from people if you're telling some unexpected stories they hadn't seen, if you're giving a new perspective, you start hearing positive response from folks. And I think, we have a chance to be an example, and to really show the world in all its complexity. And there are going to be some people that accept it, and there are going to be people that don't. But I also think the ability to bring in the perspectives of people who have not been represented, whose voices are rarely heard, is very powerful. They need to see those images too. And I think there's a lot of positive things that can happen here, even if we get backlash.
I would simply add that it's an all beat challenge. We would not be gaining ground if, even as we thought, hey, that's a good idea, let's expand our coverage of race with another reporter. We're not going to gain ground if it looks like it's the work of two reporters as compared to, the reporter covering small business, the reporter covering schools, public health. So I think it's an all beat challenge. I also think in this moment in particular, it really requires something obvious and decisive. The community is not going to really notice and stop in its busy life and say, wow, there's unconscious bias training in the Star Tribune newsroom. That's vital. We're going to do it, but I don't think people are going to notice it. One thing we just did do that was highly noticed and way overdue is that we debuted last weekend a Metro columnist who is a local Black journalist, lived in the community for 20 years. And it was really heartening because his first column introducing himself and talking about the mission he's going to have literally was the most read story on our website the day it appeared. There are hundreds of comments on that story, largely positive, and he himself got well over 100 emails from readers. And so just one initial sign, but I think that's partly where trust building comes from. It has to be obvious and it has to be sustained. And we hope that's one of the ways here that we cultivate more trust.
I'll try and add something different. Not just what we do, like positive stories, more experts of color, but what we stop doing. And one of the things I think I see in newsrooms today is, did I freeze again? Okay, one of the things that I see some newsrooms beginning to do is to stop using the mugshots. The media has really been responsible or bear some responsibility for the negative stereotypes and for the perception communities have about Black people. So, we're quick the police gave us the mugshot, we're quick to put that mugshot on the front page. We're quick to put that mugshot on television. And we never come back and say to you, well, one of the people who were up there, they were since not charged. It's a cheap way out. It's a way just to, especially on television, just to fill some space. And it's unnecessary. We can tell that story without putting the mugshot up there. And I think too often, news managers, we really need to focus on that. I know in our newsroom, we now have a policy that we don't just automatically put that mugshot up there. And I've seen many, many newsrooms do that. And I think that is the way to go. I'll give you one example that happened in Flint, Michigan. There was a newspaper, there were 3 Black men who were running for state representatives. 2 of those men, actually all 3 of those men at one time when they were younger, had been arrested for some small misdemeanor. What does the newspaper do? In telling the story, they also put the mugshots up there. This was like 10 or 15 years ago. So is that kind of just for the sake of doing it? And the paper ultimately apologized because what they didn't do was use the current photo of these candidates. So when you have examples like that, I think we need to step back and look at that. I think the other thing that we sometimes do in the media, if there is a Black victim in particular, and that person has been shot, something tragic has happened. Why they died is the main story, but then what we will do is go back and look at their past record, and that record may have, may include some crime that they committed that has nothing to do with what happened to them today. But we go back and we tend to do that more with Black victims than we do others. And just one other thing, if there is a young person who's missing, a teenager who's missing, and that poor Black mother is screaming and hollering, saying, please do the story on my Black child who's not a runaway and who's missing, but that one almost gets vetted. But, when we do the Pretty Blonde in a Heartbeat, and you've seen those studies before. So there's some things that, that again, it comes to kind of that unconscious bias and things that the media, that we need to change to help the communities see us in a different light, in a better light.
Well, I do appreciate you all for all those answers. And I'm sure that there's content that we have discussed that people can take away and use in their own daily lives or their own shops. But I do want to ask one more question to each of you. What piece of advice would you give to organizations that want to diversify their staffs and their leadership ranks? What can they do right now?
I'll start. I mean, I actually think the single most valuable thing we did in this reckoning, in the aftermath of George Floyd's killing, was frankly shut up and listen. And the most profound thing we went through is that we spent myself, managing editor, the publisher. We had two 2-hour sessions outside because of COVID, beside the Mississippi River in a park. And I said to journalists of color who were leading their sort of thoughtful reflection on this moment, I'm not going to say anything for like a long time. So let rip and be honest. And I really feel like from giving them the comfort to say bluntly some things we didn't realize or had overlooked or distracted by budget challenge here or there was very cathartic for them, vital for them, and really starkly helppful for us. And so I can't stress enough that act of shutting up, I said to someone the other day, like, listening is not waiting to speak. It's really being quiet and hearing the depth of pain and discomfort about some of these issues. So that'd be my first piece of advice. I think it's really going to propel us to the more tactical things we have to do.
I'd like to see newsrooms just literally put all the faces on a screen of people who are in the decision-making positions. Put the faces up there. Who decides what stories we're covering? Who decides? Who helps shape the news? And look around and make that commitment right then and there to hire more people of color at the top.
I would say, being honest and open, and just stop being defensive. Just stop, because we haven't done it right. And make the people in your newsroom that care so very deeply about all these issues your partners, because we don't have all the ideas as leaders. There's a lot of good ideas, and there's been a lot of good learning across our company. But I think we have to take off the defensive shield and join efforts with our colleagues to make this better.
Excellent. Well, I did want to get to a few of the viewer questions that are out there. One question that was asked by Holly is wondering if you could touch on how coverage has changed this summer. And as some of you have mentioned, you've added reporters covering diversity and inclusion to your rosters, and you've created new diversity and inclusion focused verticals. But is this going to be a passing topic? How can you ensure that it stays? And actually, Jillian,
I've got to
that's how her name is
Um,
pronounced.
I need to, my apologies, guys. I've got to jump off. I've got to finish a story today. So I could, commit an hour. I want to thank everybody. I'm going to jump off before you get to, answer that question. All right.
Well, Dorothy,
so
thank you
much
for being with
having
us.
me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, I would say that it goes back to the point I was trying to make about accountability, that, what we're going to be attempting to do across departments is assert that as a priority and have accountability around it. And so that we can say, every 6 months, okay, let's audit where we've been. What are we still missing? Where have we had gains? And so one of the things in motion here would be a plan to have kind of what you might call, I guess, a rolling audit of coverage by department.
Okay.
I would say, the AP has actually had a race and ethnicity team since 2017. And we really worked hard to weave them into all of our coverage, because let's face it, these kinds of issues are not sideline issues, and it's not just about covering a topic or a community. The folks in those communities care about taxes and schools and everything else. So I think for us, it is also about accountability, looking at our coverage. And we've started to, really try to evaluate and see where our problems are. We haven't started tracking things specifically. We need to figure that out. But we've been giving great thought to how we can ensure that we are getting different kinds of voices into the content, and also looking at areas where we might be weak and how we can improve them.
Okay. Got a couple more here I think we have time for. One viewer asks that they're part of a committee in the newsroom that is formed back in July to address diversity and inclusion and pave the way for more inclusive practices in hiring within the journalism. They wanted to put out a joint statement with the leadership about the initiatives they were going to undertake, but the management apparently is hesitant to publicly release anything other than general ambitions. They want to keep specifics, specific strategies, and everything else internally. How important is it to share these tactics with the public? And is it important to be specific versus saying we want to do better? Before you answer, I'll say be specific. We've been saying we want to do better. Put something down, write it down, have a plan. A hope is not a plan. You must have a plan. Sorry, go ahead. Back to the panelists.
Well, Amanda said it earlier, like, we got to drop this defensiveness. What's the wisdom in that, right? It's like, if we can't be honest now, when can we be honest, right? We got miles to go. It's of bedrock importance. Here we've made gains. We've done some things right. It's fragile, but we've overlooked some things, and so or we've been distracted by some things. And so, yeah, you can be nervous, you can have some excuses, but what's the point? The point is, let's dare ourselves to get much better and to be authentic. And part of being authentic is being transparent and specific. And so, what do we have to fear? I'd rather sort of trust the majority of our readers to challenge us in an appropriate way. And so I totally agree, Michael. I don't know where that question comes from, so I don't want to be insulting anyone, but specific is way better. Why fear it?
I would agree. And I would think that, if you need to get them on your side, you're going to have to build some bridges with some folks who might be leaning your way, and then use their influence to influence others. So it may be just that, there's fear and you can help them see their way through it.
Yeah, and I would only add that that session I referred to, when we sat outside for a couple of hours, I have to concede is that, my own sense of things had some limits and some flaws. And I don't think I started in a bad place, but just sitting there and genuinely trying to listen deeply to what I was hearing was extremely helpful. And so to the person asking that question, I can't recommend highly enough just insisting on a deep, honest conversation in which your perspective is heard, because mindsets can be changed, or minds opened a little bit more by that. I don't think we would be where we are without that.
A couple more here until Julie pulls the plug on me, but there's a good one from a journalist who says, what would be your advice to share for student journalists of color preparing to, and in some cases, considering whether they should try to enter this challenging and complicated job market right now?
You want to go first, Amanda, or you want me to take a shot at it?
I can. I would say be open to anything. And that actually is something that I've applied throughout my whole career. If there was an opportunity, I took it. It didn't always make sense. I didn't always know where it was going. And so my career is like this jagged line. But I suspect most people's are. So I think be open, and be open to trying something that you didn't expect or didn't plan on, and make good connections. The networking thing is so key. This is a small group of people. This is a small business, and most of us know each other. So really work the connections, work the networking, because a lot of times how we get our jobs is who we know.
And I would simply say, if you care about these issues, if you enjoy this craft, now journalism needs you. I mean, we need that kind of perspective from the generation rising up, because it won't be long before journalists like you actually are leading things or presiding over other journalists in some way. And so it's always going to be hard. And we don't know where this is going. If we had this session a year from now, how much more credibility would we have? How many gains would we have? But it feels different to me. And when I look around the people I know in journalism, I feel like a bell has rung, and there's going to be more determination than ever to gain ground. We'll see. But I do think if you're a young journalist, it's a moment in which you can be part of a positive force.
Yeah, I will echo what Amanda and Rene said, simply because I think, first of all, you should have your own mentors right now, whether they're professors, whether they're other students that you've worked with. Try to build your own board of directors for your life and your career, and then start getting advice from them and bouncing things off of them. It's ultimately going to be your decision, because you have to be happy in your career. You have to be happy where you go. But a lot of times people can help you see that sometimes you have to make a left turn in order to go right. And it's important to not turn down an opportunity just because you can't see 2 moves down the board. You need to understand what's going on right now and how this may benefit you or help build your skill set as you're getting ready to move forward in your career. The left turn may be the best thing that ever happened to you. So I throw that out there as well. I haven't had the plug pulled on me yet, so I'm going to ask another question here. So they're 2 separate questions, but I'm going to ask them at the same time. Do you recommend electing reporters of color as inclusion champions? And if so, should they be compensated for that extra labor? And furthermore, how can we explain to journalists that it is not a Black story, it is not a Latino story, etc. It's an American story. So it's two-parter.
A good one. I think I'll start since I brought up the inclusion champions. So our inclusion champions come from a variety of backgrounds. One of the things that we need to be very mindful of is that a lot of times we tend to frame diversity and inclusion as Black and white, but there are many types of diversity and inclusion. There's gender, there's geography, there's class, there's ability, which is something that came up in our sports coverage. So there's a lot of different ways to be inclusive, and there's age. And so we have a variety of people, and so managers would ask them if they wanted to participate, because for us, we need to start with the core of the willing. And so they aren't compensated monetarily, but they're getting special training and different opportunities that other people might get, and they're getting leadership opportunities. So I think that that's really been great for us. And now I've forgotten the second part of the question. What was the second question, Michael?
So there was the champions, and then there was how do you get reporters to really wrap their minds around and understand, and this may be journalists that aren't journalists of color, that they're not doing a Black story, they're not doing a Latino story, they're doing an American story. These are just stories of Americans.
I think that's where the inclusion champions are really valuable for us, because if I come to someone who's a reporter and I say, hey, you're not doing this right, they're going to be scared. It's so much better if their peer is talking to them about their stories. I do think that us having the fault lines training was really good for us, because it was a way of level setting and allowing us to have conversations about who are the audiences that we're writing for, who are the voices that are valuable in our coverage, and how we can bring different voices to the fore. I think for some people, it is going to be a struggle. It is not going to be a short-term thing. It's going to take lots of discussion and back and forth. And I think everyone has to be realistic about that. When I think about this challenge across AP, I think it's going to take years. But I feel like we can get there. But as Rene said, it is about changing mindsets.
And, I would only add that, even as we say, for example, we need to think expansively about how we cover race. I mean, there's a point within that point, which is, I think gets at the question asked, is that it's not just saying, okay, well, I'm going to turn the lens to racial community X or racial community Y, be it Latino, be it Black, but just within the fabric of the general coverage. If you're writing about schools, if you're writing about a big reading initiative in suburban schools, well, as part of that, take a photo of a Somali student who's part of that story, or like weave it into the fabric of general coverage, not just isolate it off on its own perch, because one without the other is incomplete, and it does sort of relegate it as like this other thing that, oh, that's not my beat. Where if I'm covering schools or if I'm covering health, how do I have kind of a diversity of voices and perspective and images within that beat, regardless of what the person covering race is doing? And I think that's a subtler challenge, but if you meet it, then the full spectrum of your coverage gets better.
Well, I do appreciate everybody today. I wanted to, we really need to wrap up. We've gone over, and I do apologize. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but I want to thank Amanda Barrett, the Deputy Managing Editor for AP, Rene Sanchez, the Editor and Senior Vice President of the Star Tribune, Dorothy Tucker, who had to jump off, but is the President of the National Association of Black Journalists. I would like to also really thank the Journalism Institute and the National Press Club for putting this conversation on. I think it's been absolutely wonderful. And I don't say that as the moderator, I say that as really someone who got to throw out the question and then listen to wonderful answers. I do appreciate everybody's time today, and I look forward to seeing you all in the future.
Thank you, Mike.
You all have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.